welcome to the host as guest. Today, I'm joined by Susan Montiel. Susan is the CEO and founder of Casa Montiel Properties, based all over the US, but she's currently sat in Virginia, about an hour south of Washington, D.C. Susan, thanks for joining the show. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Leo. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Susan, well, obviously we've spoken before, and I know your story. I'm really excited to hear you tell it to our audience. Tell us, how did you first get into the short-term rental industry?
Well, as a guest, really, that's really where my journey started. So I worked for a tech company for 13 years, and our company was fully remote. And an opportunity came up that my boss at the time allowed me to really work from anywhere. So my husband and I did the whole, sell everything, pack it up, and hit the road. We started in the US for 14 months, and we rented an Airbnb in 14 different cities in 14 different months. So that's really how we started to get into the short-term rental industry. It was a great time to really go throughout the country, hit all the major cities, LA, Seattle, New York, Philadelphia, DC, and just spend a month in those cities, feeling more like a local than a tourist. And that's really sparked a big passion for us. Airbnb, short-term rentals, they allowed us to do that. Historically, it would have been really challenging to try to get leases in all these different places and find furnished rentals, but Airbnb just made it so easy for us to look ahead a couple months, find a great place, and book it.
You were the original digital nomads. I love it, Susan. Yeah. I love it. What year was that?
That was in 2019. So we actually planned to go a little bit longer. And, then the world kind of came to a halt in 2020, right, in March. And so we decided to get back home when we didn't know exactly what was going to happen with COVID and all of that. So we rented a couple Airbnbs back home in San Diego. That's where I'm originally from. And we were there for a couple months and then decided to, get an apartment again because we were all kind of in lockdown for a whole year, right? And then as soon as we could, we hit the road again. And this time we went international, heading to Mexico for a month and then to Europe for 3 more months after that.
I love this idea of a month in each city first time and then over to Europe afterwards. I guess you must have seen a real range of quality in terms of how you were treated as a guest over that period of time.
Oh, yes, definitely. We would go into places that were wonderfully put together. They thought of everything. Then we would go into some places that did really well, but, they forgot a plastic shower curtain liner or a broom or things like that, right? And then we went into some places that were just not good. We had times where they had no soup spoons or cooking utensils. So I'm, taking soup out of a pot with a measuring cup because they had one, right? So there's so many times that when we would go to these properties, my husband and I, we would sit there and kind of pick it apart. They're missing this. This furniture isn't quite working for us here. I have to say I am that guest that will move your furniture around if I'm going to be there for a month and it doesn't quite work with how we need to live. So I think there are a lot of amazing hosts out there, but I do find that the majority of the hosts that we stayed at really had areas of improvement. And it really comes down to how is that guest living in your space? Especially if they're going to be there for a midterm, right? There's so many hosts out there that are wanting to get into the midterm space, or they kind of want to do both. How a guest needs to use your space on a short-term basis. When they're there as a tourist, they're maybe going to sit on the sofa once or twice. Maybe they're going to cook a meal. Is different than a guest who needs to be there on a midterm basis. They need different sofas, different position, more fully stocked, right? So we definitely picked apart a lot of these properties when we went to them and we're traveling all over the country.
I feel like you, as a short-term rental property, a vacation rental property manager, host, you should always be catering to the guest that might spend the week sat on the sofa, because ultimately a place has to feel homely. I was in a short-term rental recently, and everything I picked up was really like, it was very, very lightweight, made of plastic, flimsy, you know, like even down to the sofas, the vases, whatever was out. And it was really disappointing because you couldn't tell that fully in the pictures, but when you arrived, it was like everything was very, very cheaply bought. And I kind of thought to myself, you know, as an investment, I think that's one of the most important investments you can make up front, is just make sure your home is very, very, very livable. And then if things break, you know, you have to replace them. But it doesn't mean that you should go cheap just because things will break. I think you still have to, you know, you want to cater for, like, you know, it's going to be really hard to go, well, do you know what, let's move the cheap things out now because we've got a 1 month booking. You should just have those things to begin with, you know, furnish it with love. I don't know what you think about that.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the saying goes, buy nice or buy thrice, right? So if you spend the money to invest in good quality furniture and you think about how people are going to use it, you're going to get those returns, right? I see so many hosts where we're all racing to the bottom. Our calendars aren't full, and the one thing we think is, let's lower our price, lower our price, lower our price, right? But if you want to start increasing your price, that increased price has to reflect in what you're providing that guest, right? You know, if they're going to spend $400, $500, $600 plus, depending on your market, they want to go in there and have good quality furniture, measuring cups, glassware, right? I've been in Airbnbs where I get there and all they have is plastic plates, plastic bowls, plastic cups, right? And I'm there for a month, and you can tell the host is trying to be cheap. You know, I think in their mind, they think, well, if it's plastic, they're not going to break it. I never have to replace it, right? Sometimes things break, they do, but that is a cost of business. And that's a place that I'm not going to rebook when I go back, right? And I don't want to feel as a guest that I have to purchase things, which I have done before. I try to be that ideal guest because I'm living there for a month and I don't want to have any issues, where I've spent, you know, a couple dollars buying a broom or buying that shower curtain liner for Dollar Tree, right? But you do want to put good quality items, furniture, and you're totally right, Leo. Like you should be putting furniture in case your guest does want to lie around and watch TV all weekend, even if they're there, right? One of the things that I see the most is hosts that put a single sofa that seats 3 and maybe a couple chairs, right? That's kind of like, from an aesthetic standpoint, that looks nice. But from a functional standpoint, it doesn't, because if my husband and I want to watch TV, you know, both of us can't just lie down and enjoy a movie, right? We can both sit down maybe on the sofa, or one of us lies down on the sofa, but the other has to sit in a chair. Like, it's not comfortable. I love seeing places that have more of that sectional kind of look, or if you are going to have that 3-seater, you know, have one where it extends or it has an ottoman so people can actually be comfortable when they sit and watch movies, because that's what they do, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I like that. You're just being thoughtful, right? It's totally about being thoughtful. I also picked up on something you said earlier about the idea of it always being a race to the bottom. Like, whereas you're right, think of it as a race to the top. What can I do to make sure that I can hold my price?
It does. It does. You know, I start seeing how how hosts are setting up their properties. And I'm like, they could really use a guest who's really going to give them good, honest feedback and not try to berate them or make them feel bad, but come to them from a stance of business. I'm understanding your business. I understand the importance of this property for you, for your family, right? So that's when I started to think, maybe I could get into this business. Maybe I could do some consulting, right? And help hosts by providing them some feedback on their properties, what guests are looking at. Myself, I've stayed at close to 70 Airbnbs all over the world. So I definitely have a lot of experience as a guest. And my background in small business operations and hospitality, I really felt brought me to a point where I could really help hosts with their properties.
Was it surprising to you that that's what people needed help with?
It wasn't surprising to me because of what I lived as a guest. Most of the time when I see hosts, they need help. They want to know why they're not booking, right? And one of the things that I find that many hosts don't do is they don't put themselves in the seat of the guest and go look at their property against other properties. At the end of the day, it comes down to your comps. When I'm a guest and I'm scrolling Airbnb or Furnish Finder or wherever I'm looking, it's you against sometimes hundreds of other properties, right? So I'm going in there filtering for what I need, the price, and seeing what your property looks like against somebody else's, right? And I think a lot of hosts miss that. When it comes down to their staging, their description, what they're looking at, their photos, oh my goodness, the amount of hosts that I see that don't even do professional photos today is still mind-boggling. You know, you spend thousands of dollars, sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars getting these investments, and then you don't want to pay, you know, 300 to 500 for professional photos. But there's a number of hosts that struggle with that. And I think it's important for hosts, again, to put themselves in the seat of the guest. And what does it look like when I'm scrolling your market and I come across your property?
I really like that as advice. And let me sort of put another angle on that too for you to think about is how often when you were looking for properties over the years that you were traveling, and the year in America and then the years in Latin America and Europe, how often was it the location you were set on or the home that you were set on? And did the home ever challenge where you thought you wanted to be based on, you know, like, because I think that's what we often miss. We go, well, you know, like the guest always wanted to stay on the south side of my city. Maybe they didn't. Maybe it was the home that drew them there, and you have that responsibility to make it as beautiful as possible, and so you can bring them into your neighborhood. They might not have been looking in your neighborhood, right?
Right, exactly. And we also can't forget about price as well, right? Like all of those things come into play. When you're living the digital nomad life, you're living regular life, right? So my ability to YOLO and spend $4,000 a month on a New York City apartment, can't do that, right? If that's not my normal rent budget as a digital nomad, or somebody like, it could be a traveling nurse, right? Somebody who works in corporate or insurance, right? They still have to stay within their budgets. So that's one thing that I would always look at. What's in my budget? And then from there, okay, what's in my ideal location? Do I like the homes then in that ideal location? If not, then, okay, let me look outside of that, because I'm not going to stay in a house that isn't up to par in my ideal location. I will pick one that is a nicer home outside of my ideal location, because I actually have to live there for a whole month, right? And as a digital nomad, I'm working in the home. So the environment also needs to be a good environment for me to want to be in, right? So I have no problem staying outside my desired location. But I do also look for, you know, transportation. I will pick some place that's closer to a train line than some place that isn't, right? So a number of these things have to come into play. And it's important that hosts think about not only the experience that the guest will have in your home, but why they're choosing your home in their larger need for being in that place, right? Are they close to transportation? You know, is it easy to Uber to their place? Is it a neighborhood you want to pick up an Uber at night when you're coming back from being downtown, right? So all of these things come into play when guests are looking for the property that's going to meet their needs.
So, so Susan, tell us then. So, when did you pick up your first property, and what model do you use for growth? Do you manage? Do you arbitrage? Do you own the properties that you run?
Sure. So we started with co-hosting back in 2023. We actually started with the idea of wanting to do arbitrage. That's really kind of where we were going. And as we were starting to make calls to landlords and things like that, we had an opportunity for somebody who was looking to kind of get into Airbnb, but didn't know where to start and, you know, wanted some help, right? So through the conversations with that person, we ended up taking on some co-hosting for them. It was a different model than what we thought we were going to do, right? When you're co-hosting, you're taking on somebody else's property in their market with their furniture, right? And you kind of have to make it work. And we did it remotely too, because they were in Texas and we were in California. And so we, like, right out of the gate went for a property that wasn't in our market, and we had to figure out how to manage it remotely. And we enjoyed that because we wanted to still continue to live our digital nomad life and didn't want to be tied down to a specific market. So we really, since then, have found more headway in the market with doing co-hosting over arbitrage. That's still something we may pick up. But in between our co-hosting, now what we're trying to do is acquire some properties and be owners ourselves in different markets. But that's really kind of where we have gone from start to end of where we're at today.
Yeah, and I like the co-hosting model for the reason that it can allow you ultimately more freedom, right? Because you haven't got to do hard repairs on properties, right? It's about supporting with the booking flow, and then maybe even if you have a hands-on owner, they might organise their own handyman versus you organising the handyman. So it feels like a good way to grow. So in that co-hosting business, are you more advising steering people towards midterm? Are you looking for midterm markets, or is it everything really, all types of bookings?
It's really everything. It really depends on the market and the owner and the owner's goals. At the end of the day, when we're co-hosting, it's the owner's property, it's their investment, it's their goals. What are they looking to do and why, right? I have one, for example, in San Diego that's in a market that is very vacation heavy. So in that one, we do full short-term rental. We get leads for midterm rentals, but we just don't take them because it's more profitable for us to do short term, and we're getting the flow, right? I have another one that we just signed that in Tampa, they're also going to be short term rental only. But I have one in Texas where they're kind of a hybrid. The owner is very concerned with secure money coming in every single month. So for them, they really want to gravitate more towards the midterm and use short term, in between reservations. So that's kind of where they're at. And then I have a property in New York where, due to city regulations, they can't do short-term rental. It'd be perfect for a short-term rental. They'd make a ton of money, but they just can't do it. So we are full midterm rental on that property. So it just really depends on the market. And like I said, even the owner. I had a conversation with somebody, a potential new owner, just this past week, where she's in Columbus. It would be great for short-term rental. People are making money there as a short-term rental. She does not want to get into short-term rental at all. She doesn't want to deal with it. Even if she has a co-host that is going to take care of everything for her, she does not want her property used as a short-term rental. So, okay, she's the owner. It's her investment. It's her money. She's on the hook for all of it at the end of the day. So we work within what she wants to do.
Okay, great. So you can see your role here as to advise, to help and to support, but ultimately make sure that you're able to deliver on what the owner's goals are. If the owner has unrealistic goals, will you turn them down?
Yeah, actually, I have to say that my husband and I, as we're looking at this property in Ohio, we think we're actually going to turn down that property. I would love to help her, and I'm actually today crafting an email of all the things I think she can improve on. But at the end of the day, when I look at the bones of her house and what her goals are, I feel like it's going to be really hard for me to deliver that. For example, she has a three-bedroom house, 6 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and she wants to rent them out as individual rooms. That's a very hard sell for 3 different reservations in one home with only 1 bathroom, and the washer and dryer are also in that same bathroom, right? So I feel like no matter what I do, that's going to be hard. And she's had a hard time since January when she's launched it already. She's had one group that has rented the entire home, and she's also had one gentleman rent 1 room. And that's a challenge too, because if you're going to do the room rental, right, that one person taking up 1 room is getting the whole house for the cost of 1 room. And if you don't fill those other rooms, then that makes it a very big challenge trying to hit your revenue goals, right? Trying to transition from 3 reservations in a room to 1 entire house, right? So I do have to turn down some owners sometimes when where they're at, their home, what their goals are, I just think is going to be really hard to deliver. And I think a lot of hosts are feeling that right now also. You hear all the time Airbnb bust and all this stuff, and Airbnb is going away. The ones that are very strategic and have the right house in the right market tailoring to the right guest are being successful. The ones that don't have those three things aligned are starting to struggle now.
Okay, that's really interesting. I like the way you've talked about that, and I guess that guides you as to what deals you shouldn't take. Also, we talk about Airbnb. I was going to ask you a little bit about distribution. You also mentioned furnished finders a little bit earlier.
Furnished finder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you find that most of the bookings that your clients are taking, particularly with midterm, but just generally across the board, are on Airbnb? Which channels are good? Which channels are good for your owners, apart from Airbnb as well?
Sure. So for us, we've had a lot of success with Furnished Finder for our midterm rentals. I've heard from a number of hosts that they don't have good experiences with Furnished Finder, but I think it really also comes down to your market and how many people are traveling who need midterm rentals in those markets. So yes, we've used Furnished Finder for midterms. We've used for short-term Airbnb, Booking.com, VRBO, getting our sites on Google Vacations, Hopper. Like, we're really just trying to put our properties everywhere, right? There's shifts that are happening in our country where, just a little while ago, people wanted to boycott Airbnb because of some political things they were getting into, right? And I had hosts that I knew who were getting cancellations because of that, right? So diversifying where you're marketing your property is really important. And we just really put our homes on all of the platforms and then see what is making the most sense for each of the different markets.
Tell me, I meet lots of people who are co-hosting and they're completely burned out by it. You seem very in control. How have you built this business to make sure that you still have a life? You're still able to, not be chained to the laptop 24 hours a day, unless you are chained to the laptop 24 hours a day.
Well, I'm glad I look like I have it all put together. I try to be, but I do get the call at 11 p.m. my time in Virginia because our home in California had a plumbing issue, right? So we still are available to our guests all the times of the day, right? We haven't grown or scaled yet to a place where we need to hire VAs or somebody to take over for us, in the evenings. But we really try to build our business in a way where we are developing, the standard operating procedures. We do have our templates that we use. We've trained our teams in the various areas to make sure they're doing the cleaning right or the inspecting right or checking out the patio and the propane tanks, right? So we spent a lot of time training our boots on the ground team in those areas, and then internally just really tried to build those systems. And yeah, still available for those late night calls that we get occasionally.
I love that. You're never too big as a company to take those 11 p.m. phone calls about lockouts. No. Never.
Yeah.
So we talk about SOPs and templates. Really interesting. What tech tools do you use to help enable you to run the business effectively the way you want to?
Sure. So the PMS that we're using is HostAway. So that's been very helpful to bring all of the different properties into one central location. We have our accounting systems, our QuickBooks and things like that. But really, we've been able to get away with not needing to use too many platforms. We do integrations also, though, with Yale. We've used Superhog Truvy. That's one of our partners also. So we have utilized those. And then we also use partners like Price Labs for our dynamic pricing, AirDNA, when we're looking at profitability in different markets and when I'm reviewing properties for potential new owners. So we use a number of those different tools to really do what we do on a daily basis.
Fantastic. I was going to ask you about new markets, because from the conversations we've had, it seems that and again, you'll correct me if I'm stretching here and it isn't quite accurate, but it seems like you will have a go at any area of the USA, assuming you've got the data to back up that you think it might be a good area. Like you're not tied to one specific geography, right?
No, that's correct. So usually when I have a new owner that I'm evaluating for, I'll pull up their area on AirDNA.
And Susan, it seems to me tell me if I'm wide of the mark. It seems to me that I was going to ask you about data because it seems to me you're willing to take properties anywhere in the United States of America, assuming that the data checks out and you think you can make it work, looking at whatever the host wants to achieve and you think is achievable in their market, which we talked about. Is that right? Or are you tied to certain geographies?
Yeah, no, it is definitely right. So we will take on an evaluation for any property owner in any part of the US. We utilize programs like AirDNA to just understand who's in their market, how are they performing, how much revenue are they generating, and what are they offering to their guests. From there, we can then look at the property that we're evaluating and understand how much money they could make if their properties are similar to theirs, and or how much investment that new owner does need to make into their property in order to make as much money as some of the other people in their market, right? So we look at data for what's already there in the market, evaluate it against the property, and then also have a good and honest conversation with the owner on whether or not they're willing to make that investment to compete, because it's all about competition at the end of the day. If they are, great. We can talk about what that looks like. We're also evaluating their home and can it actually compete with those other properties? And if it can, we'll start to work towards moving forward with taking them on as a client. If they can't, or sometimes owners decide they don't want to get into it after we have a conversation, which I really appreciate it, right? Because I'd rather them know the information up front and decide it's not a good avenue for them to go than for them to waste their time and their money and not get the returns that they're looking for. So it is important for us to really kind of evaluate the market, the data, the property, and then see if they're there. And then also talk with them about what they're really looking for from their co-host. So we do make it very clear to them that we are a co-host. We help with the operations of their business, but we are not a licensed property manager. I think that that's a really clear distinction, because every state is different when it comes to what somebody can do on the property and whether or not they need to be a licensed property manager, a real estate broker, have certain licenses. So we don't touch certain things on their property.
What have you found is the most common reason that a host wants to work with a co-host?
I would say there's two things. There's time. Many people who want to get into Airbnb have full-time jobs doing something completely different, right? But they want to turn their property into an investment that's generating money. So sometimes it's just time. And then the second is just know-how. They understand that this is a whole other business, a whole other industry. And in order to be competitive, you have to be in the industry day in, day out, looking at trends, pricing, what's new, changes in guests and what they're looking for. And they just don't have the time for that. They'd rather hire somebody who, this is our full-time job. This is our bread and butter. We eat, sleep, breathe everything in the short-term rental industry so that we can actually advise them properly. So those are two things that are really important: time and knowledge that they're willing to outsource that to.
And tell me, what would be your number one piece of advice to somebody who wants to become a co-host, who's maybe hosted some of their own properties and wants to take the leap and grow a business?
Oh, that's a really great question. I would say the advice that I would give is for them to really understand that they have two clients. They have the owner and they have the guest, right? It's not just about the guest, it's making the owner happy as well. So do what you can to understand your owner, understand your property, understand your market. And if you can combine all of those things together, then you can be successful. I would also work on building your operations, what makes you stand out as a co-host. There are a lot of co-hosts out there. I mean, you can go on Upwork or Fiverr and type Airbnb and you're going to have 100 people that can take on your property. And that's anywhere from, an offshore VA who wants to co-host to all the way to these big companies like Evolve, right? There's a lot. So it's important to really understand your business and how you how you also compare to other co-hosts that are out there. And if you're really struggling and you really want to get in there, join all the groups, join the Facebook groups and watch the TikToks and get into all of these different networks. Listen to the podcasts, right? Spend a little bit of money and join some of the masterminds that are out there for people who are teaching this stuff for co-hosts, right? Invest your time to get knowledgeable. And I think if you do those things, then you'll get to a point where you're becoming a successful co-host.
I like that. Get education, meet your tribe, go to the conferences, right? Go to the workshops, go to the in-person stuff, and obviously listen to the Host as Guest podcast. I mean, that's number one piece of advice, isn't it, for anyone?
Yes, absolutely.
Susan, it's a very stressful industry, and most industries are, but this one in particular. How do you get away from it? What do you do to blow off steam?
Well, I try to make sure I'm going out and exploring. We're still kind of in this digital nomad life out here in Virginia. So I try to get out and explore my area, explore the town. Now that the snow has gone away, I'm excited to go hiking and spend some time in nature, spend some time with friends. Sometimes you're going to need a good stiff margarita to get through the day, and that's okay also. But I like to spend time with my family and friends and just having a new experience. It's part of the industry that we're in, is the travel industry, right? And the hospitality industry. So I like to go travel and go to a bar or a restaurant and let somebody be hospitable to me for once.
Susan, I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leo. It was a real pleasure sitting with you and talking with you.
And to you at home, if you've enjoyed today's show, please hit like, share, subscribe in all the usual social places. Give us a 5-star review. It all helps. Until next time, many thanks.